While there is a lot to criticize about the story of the main game, I'll be focusing mainly on the gameplay and changes Survival Mode brings, going through the tutorial section of the game and see if it should be recommended to anyone wanting to return to Fallout 4 or trying it as the first difficulty, okay? Okay. Skipping past the opening cinematic and after hearing War Never Changes one too many times, we're presented with a character creation screen. As far as character creation goes, it's pretty good. You have enough options to make yourself look like a real human being. If there's one thing to complain, it's your character moving while you have to pick a specific facial spot to sculpt. For example, let's say you select your nose, you can make it crooked by moving it to the side, but since your character moves, you might have unintentionally made it so. Personally, I rather play with bars than sculpting, as it would avoid such a problem. After finishing creating your character and possibly customizing the appearance of your spouse, you get a short section of interacting with everyday objects, making you familiarized to the setting. Going through your wardrobe, reading the newspaper, seeing Ron Perlman being miscast on the TV. Then a Vault-Tec representative knocks on the door and you are presenting with Fallout 4's dialogue system. There's much to be said why this system is bad, but to put it simply, let's say if a character was selling a game copy of a successful fantasy series which re-releases on multiple platforms with multiple versions, possibly celebrating a decade from its initial release, your options are to accept the purchase, not knowing what sarcasm is, jokingly accept, ask, "What are video games?" and accept, or having denied, get a reconfirmation option later and accept it anyway. After accepting, you get to name your character and assign your special stats, the main statistics that derive what your character is capable of. While the limit of a special stat being 10 means you should be average in an area at 5, the points you get to allocate average out at 4 in all. While the idea of being mediocre in everything or horrendous in most but a few areas seems appealing, the game doesn't treat these stats as severely as I'd like. In fact, a lot of mechanics aren't locked away from having a stat at 1, which it would be more correct to say your character is average at 1, good at 5, and excellent at 10. What these stats really affect are the perks you'll initially have available to pick once you level up, though at this point we are not told nor shown what these perks are, essentially making it a crapshoot at this stage. After thinking you made a unique character, the Skyrim salesman casually walks away. Your robot companion informs you of your baby crying, and if you don't check on him, the nukes don't fall. Spoilers, I guess. But there really isn't much left to this segment of pre-war life. Sirens ring, you and your spouse take the baby and run to your signed vault, get suited up and chill out. You get thawed out and the game proper begins. While trying to leave the vault, you can find out the reason why we were cryogenically frozen through computer terminals. This is one of the main ways Fallout 4 environmentally tells us its story. Other ways environmental story is told is through recordings, notes, and generally the way bodies are found, though that last one could be the developers trying to have fun rather than tell a story. There's even an extermination poster which contrasts with seeing our first rat roach. As far as environmental storytelling goes, this is standard, though whether to take it seriously or disregard as some developer fun is up to the individual. Personally, seeing too many skeletons in uncanny situations, I stopped caring. While environmental storytelling might seem tangential to most players, if one stops caring about their surroundings, one loses an integral part of immersion. On the way out, we get a glimpse of a unique weapon locked away behind a master level lock.
Nice. Coming back later for you.
An out-of-character line, considering everything up to this point was a concern for your spouse, questioning why Vault-Tec would do this, and confusion on big roaches. The inclusion of a voice-acted protagonist instead of keeping it silent protagonist style is one of the main reasons immersion is broken. Throughout the vault, we get short tutorials popping on the top left corner of the screen, which I wouldn't be surprised if someone might have missed an important mechanic such as the auto-targeting system. Wait, why can I use V.A.T.S without a Pip-Boy? Before leaving the vault, we get our inventory management apparatus and a character confirmation screen, where we can change our look, special stats, or rename our character. We still haven't been introduced to a skill, so rearranging our stats here is pointless. This isn't a great cutoff point and we haven't experienced enough variety of weaponry. After leaving the vault, we are free to roam, though there is a set path the game wants us to take. I'll be following it and going through it, as it in my eyes is an extension of the tutorial, and where the character confirmation screen should have been. So, going back home, you find your pre-war robot Codsworth. While informing of your situation, you get your very first charisma check, which either I got lucky or it's hard-coded to succeed. More tutorial blurbs pop up. I almost missed the explanation on sleep as it's happening during dialogue. The companion to be shows off that taking companions is useful, or at least that's the intent behind this search for the baby in the neighborhood section. Searching your home, you're able to find a 200-year-old possibly rent on through the broken roof, being in the same location as before the war without the wind blowing it away comic book, giving you an extra critical damage to melee. Also, under the dresser of the baby's room, a picture book that rewards you with a permanent select special stat increase. I haven't even leveled up, yet I'm already gaining a special increase. The ability to select outside leveling up is unique and not anywhere else in the game. It isn't a quest reward for completing the tutorial, it isn't something logged behind any sort of progress. Why is it here? It's completely missable for a new player, yet it doesn't serve any purpose besides being a reference for Fallout 3. This isn't a specific special stat increase nor a simple 5% extra damage, it's the most versatile exploration upgrade you can get, and it's in the beginning of the game. If it seems like I'm blowing this out of proportion, then consider this. Why should this item give you such a choice rather than you starting with 22 points to allocate to special instead of 21? Anyway, Codsworth informs you of a nearby town to search. On the way there you meet a dog, a traveling companion is gained, cue promotional screenshots. What we just went through was an hour of gameplay lost by one attack. I'm conflicted. This section is part of the opening act of Fallout 4's main story. Knowing where enemies that can instantly kill you spawn is borderline essential to this mode due to saving being only available when interacting with beds. As this isn't my first playthrough, I knew the Deathclaw was coming, but I didn't know how much damage it could deal. No other enemy up to this point prompted me to be more careful, and I like the intended purpose of it being a boss battle-like set piece in section. It was an instant loss, not a cinematic experience. Though if anything, it brought back the fear that a Deathclaw should bring when fighting one, which is why I'm conflicted. I'm level 4 and the only way to beat this section is by cheesing, hiding inside a building where the model of the enemy can't pass the door frame. As for power armor, yeah, it's too powerful to get this early. Your strength is set to 10, which increases carrying capacity by quite a lot. Your ballistic resistances from the weakest edge is at least 20 times higher than without power armor. The only downside is the maintenance, which isn't a big hassle compared to the hours of lost progress due to death, and not being able to swim. As there's no restriction on character build who has the know-how to pilot this double fruit, there isn't much of a point to not having power armor besides aesthetic sensibilities for fashionable tastes. After helping Preston, Babushka Murphy points to Diamond City in her own badly contrived way. You escort them to Sanctuary where your home was, Codsworth becomes available as a companion, you get a tutorial to settlement building, and, as I see, you've experienced everything the game has to offer mechanically. This is where you should have been given a respec screen. You've experienced companions, combat with a melee weapon, a pistol, a minigun, an experimental rifle. You played while in power armor, you also would have gotten a couple of level ups. This is also a good stopping point as the game starts giving out radiant quests.
Goodbye Tuesday train, I'm looking for a milestone, but doesn't seem to be one on these paths. It's far from my home. Goodbye Wednesday train, I'm looking for a married of mine. Doesn't seem to be one on this path. It's far from my own. Where can I find you? The train has already gone.
Radiant quests are a blight. They're like filler episodes in anime, in between important events where no serious development gets to happen and exists to waste time. So imagine getting them right after completing your first quest. And imagine one of the first human characters you meet after the bombs is a filler episode dispenser. That's Preston Garvey. You can't trust him, he's a wet noodle of a character. Fortunately, there's a fix to being stuck in a never-ending loop of Radiant quests.
Do you think you could go help out with the settlement? I was hoping for a chance to rescue some more helpless villagers. I had some trouble. Told you what happened to the minute.
Another mechanic we get introduced is settlement building. It consists of building water dispensers, seeding crops, erecting sentry guns. As a gimmick, I'd say Fallout 4 succeeds in hooking me in with this for many hours. But having to rebuild Sanctuary and the many settlements again is a hassle, so I won't get into it much further than saying resources for buildings and experience gain should have stayed separate from the combat side of the game, as it's possible to gain full levels doing this. And maybe making half the DLCs about this instead of letting modders add the assets themselves is pretty devious, Todd. While settlement building is Fallout 4's entry gimmick, the gimmick of this series is the V.A.T.S system, where time dilates and you get to pick a body part to shoot. This system is what essentially defines Fallout's combat. For those who want a regular shooter can possibly ignore it, but for those interested in RPGs as strategy games rather than action, the system opens the door to first-person shooters. So how is it? It's great. Kinda. The mechanic of certain body parts being harder to hit by dealing more damage is what the system's supposed to do, but it showing how much damage will be dealt makes it a one-time thing. Once you know where to aim for maximum damage, V.A.T.S is no longer needed for its purpose. If such information were not shown, there would be more experimentation where to target, and once shots connect, can the player determine where the most damage is dealt. Instead, V.A.T.'s main use is like a pseudo-radar for enemies and mines. There is no disadvantage of spamming the V.A.T.S button. It's not behind a Pip-Boy upgrade nor a level up perk, you can just do it, which makes seeing enemies yourself pointless. Why try to discern your environment when you can just check with V.A.T.S? Well, there is a reason why you shouldn't spam, but bugs causing your game to crash aren't features. The way you deal critical damage is unlike most games. It's not chance-based. When shooting in V.A.T.S, you can have a critical meter, which fills with each successful shot. Once full, you can make your next shot a critical. Saving it for critical situations is critical. But let me be critical of such a change. This is entirely only possible in V.A.T.S. Your bar doesn't fill, nor is there a way to activate your critical hit outside of it, meaning V.A.T.S is required for critical hits, unlike previous Fallout games where it's random. There are other ways to multiply your damage, such as sneak attacks, and those could be considered non-V.A.T critical hits, but from both sources the damage multiplies. It's semantics what is and isn't a critical, but having a mechanic, 2 special stat scaling, and half the luck perks behind it makes V.A.T.S an essential part of Fallout 4's gameplay. One last thing to mention before talking about survival mode in full. It's the leveling in Fallout 4. Once every level up, you get to pick one perk rank to unlock. The perks available are dependent on your special stats, and besides the first rank, all perk ranks have a set level requirement as well. Alternatively, you could pick a special stat to permanently upgrade. As far as leveling goes, it's very simple. Gone are the days of allocating skill points and getting a perk dependent on said skill points every other level. There is something to praise here, and the simplicity of a 7x11 perk grid does make it easy to navigate. If only the inventory management was like this. But that's about it. With the removal of skills from previous entries, skills become perks. Instead of picking how much damage your small guns will do with skills, there's perks to increase damage. So instead of having a game changer perk, we get a lot of number increasing perks to substitute the system, which is very boring. Unarmed, melee, heavy guns, pistols, automatic and non-automatic rifles all have their own perks, with 5 ranks each. That's 30 levels. Even if you decide your way of dealing damage, that's 5 boring levels. Sure, they do have a secondary effect, but why not just have a perk for that secondary effect instead of a number increasing perk? I do agree with skills such as lockpicking and science being converted into perks, as opening saves and hacking data terminals were only available at a set number of skill points. But why not keep the incremental damage increases to their own system and have perks be game changers? Maybe add a resistance skill as Refractor, Toughness, and Rad Resistant go into the same boring leveling category. As it is, leveling isn't as grand as the music makes it out to be. In fact, I'd say it's completely feasible to play this game without perks as an alternative mode to survival. Your character isn't limited by being able to pilot power armor, nor adding pieces of weaponry together instead of crafting from scratch.
Shroud, it's a trap. Save yourself.
Goodbye, Wednesday train. I'm looking for a Mary of mine, but doesn't seem to be one on this path. It's far from my own. Where can I find you? The train has arrived.
Finally, the reason why I played Fallout 4 again, survival mode. The main appeal is not so much as the difficulty of combat, but having alternative forces working against you, such as hunger and thirst. Having some inventory space dedicated to your own survival instead of purely weaponry against shooting enemies is what made the mode appealing to me. What to have with you, more ammo or food, maybe medicine to fight illness that are absent from normal difficulty. Well, the survival mechanics are a bit unbalanced. Firstly, the rate at which your hunger and thirst increases is in itself okay, but every drug, even the regular stim packs, increases thirst. And the rate of water consumption required to sate this thirst from one stim pack is 2 to 1. Fortunately, there are alternative ways to heal, such as overeating food past your hunger or blood bags, which bypass the entire healing from stimpaks case, but then why are stimpaks even needed? Power armor ignores limb damage. Remember limb damage as a mechanic? Yeah. To revive companions is the only use I found. What's worse is when you get to the worst stage of dehydration and start taking periodical damage. Well, seeing as you're at the bottom and don't instantly die, why not heal using stimpaks at that point? You won't get worse, and the game gives you stimpaks left and right. There's no downside from getting thirsty. Sleep is artificially difficult to manage. You can only get fully rested in regular beds, but can't sleep more than 3 hours in sleeping bags. This leads to situations where you're in a safe environment, but can't stop being tired. A lack of sleep makes you lose strength. This could lead to having to discard items, as being encumbered in survival mode deals periodical damage. Brutal, but having to empty your inventory and slog back to a settlement with a bed is one of my highlights of a survival mode. Not knowing if a random enemy encounter will happen, not being able to run, using up all your drugs for strength increase just so you could start again. Speaking of sleep, on survival the only way to save is by sleeping. You can't quick save nor manual save. While this does make death punishing and playing requires a more tactical approach, my earlier example of a difficult enemy appearing without knowing it might be a reason why not to try survival mode, but there are worse offenders. 1. Game crashes. My game has bugged out a number of times using V.A.T.S, and without quitting I'd be stuck. There is a workaround, and that's by exiting the game back to the main menu and going back in. These saves will be deleted once you die, but will persist if your game crashes. But workarounds shouldn't be a part of the equation. There shouldn't be any of these game crashing bugs after so many years after the game released. Though a crash from curing illness is funny, I guess the true illness was me playing the game. Secondly, explosives. Thrown explosives have a small time frame when a warning HUD element is shown and the explosive goes off. And even with power armor, these are deadly without much warning. Here's a clip of me hearing the sound of a mini nuke, stopping time to prepare for impact, using drugs for a 75% damage reduction, and still dying while being in a full set of power armor. The shot wasn't even aimed at me straight. This might not seem like a complaint on its own, but loading times going up to 2 minutes when exiting buildings adds up to wasted time you will have to go through once you're dead. And if death happens instantly through an explosion, this becomes frustrating. Fallout 4 isn't Super Meat Boy, with instant revival and instant going, nor Dark Souls, where the fault lies with making mistakes that aren't as fastly punished as a mini nuke. I understand the feeling of stress and satisfaction that such a system could achieve. For example, going through the long sea without rest, not knowing if you have enough ammunition to fight everything off when going in. Without saves being restricted, that wouldn't be such a powerful moment, but the amounts of fruitless frustration when a game-breaking bug happens isn't worth it in my eyes. The weight limit is reduced in survival mode. While it makes it more difficult to carry more weaponry, it doesn't impact gameplay as most of the hassle is outside combat. You go over the limit by looting, then decide what to throw away. As inventory management pauses the gameplay isn't impacted. The only major thing is time, your time wasted. It takes time to decide what to discard, and in survival, due to the reduced weight limit, it's more frequent and happens much sooner. With companions you get to offload most of the weight, but that's another inventory screen to manage. What becomes the most time wasteful is when you have to initiate bartering with a trader, sell your acquired items, go through your companions, initiate bartering again, sell those, and see if you're still over the limit, and if there's nothing useful to buy, you offload junk back to your companion. Would be a shame if you died afterwards and had to repeat the same inventory juggling again.
Clearly not an infiltrator.
Identity check failed.
One last major feature of survival mode is the inability to fast travel. Personally, this is a great feature, or lack of a feature. Having to map out trips is something that was missing from the initial gameplay experience or missing from most open world games. Throughout the story of Fallout 4, you'll need to go inside the glowing sea twice at minimum. With fast travel, any subsequent trips are trivialized. As such, going through dangerous biomes multiple times is something I'd wish more games did. Without teleporting all over, you'll also get to witness more random encounters through the game. While being the cousin of Radiant Quest, these are much better at making the world feel not empty, although sometimes out of place and with a certain feeling of waiting for the player to participate in them. Moreover, depending on how soon you antagonize a certain faction in the game, hearing the sound of a flying chopper might be a self-added difficulty to your trips, where you need to hide rather than fight. After dying a couple of times, I found out that going back to the same location isn't worthwhile. Most loot in containers is randomized and mostly not unique. There are only a few locations where you get a safe that isn't fully randomized. Even the clothing of dead humans gets randomized on your second run. As such, if you do die, there's no reason to go back to the same locations besides collectibles or redoing a quest. If exploring closed space environments is part of the joy of exploration, then there's no reason to come back once you've witnessed it. Just go and find a new location. But what about powerful loot? Well, the problem's twofold. One, the extensive crafting system makes it so all the power of your equipment is in crafting. Sure, you get to find a similar weapon you're using and substitute components from one item to the other, but that's a minuscule upgrade that can be gotten from trading, and if you do die, there's no reason for that weapon you glad you got to be there again. Secondly, the most powerful loot is randomly assigned to legendary enemies. These enemies are a bit more powerful than their normal counterparts, and get a full heal and a buff if you don't kill them instantly. And a star for trying. Since their appearance is random and their drop loot is also random, and the effects of the item is also random, the chances of getting what you want is less than a 5-star gacha unit. Probably. It'd have been better if the game had guaranteed legendary bosses at the end of each location with guaranteed legendary items. That way there'd be more reason to return in case of death. If Bethesda wanted randomness, then they could have attached it to Radiant Quests. Random quests for random loot. I'm not disregarding some unique items being in the game, but their value and exploratory significance is smaller than it should be. That said, the environment as a reward, the mood the land brings after nuclear war, it's the biggest draw to the Fallout franchise for me. Sure, all these buildings and plastic decorations don't make sense why they should be up 200 years in the future. But the slog through the glowing sea, and even the rain falling at night, the set design of outside the city areas, this is the reason why I keep returning to Fallout 4. This is the best part of Bethesda games, the environment itself. Fallout 4 is painfully mediocre in its story, in its dialogue, in its loot randomness, but trudging through the environments makes it stimulating enough for me to have played it again. And if mood is all you're looking for in a game, Fallout 4 is a recommendation. There's one modded elephant in the room that I didn't address. Mods, yes, all the negative observations I made can be fixed through modding, but for most people their first Fallout 4 experience will be unmodded. As such, what I'm trying to convey is that mileage can differ, but the taste of your first experience will still be there. And if anyone who hasn't played Fallout 4 is watching and considering playing, this is what they'll get. So, should you play unmodded Skyrim with guns on survival? No. Definitely not as your first playthrough. As for returning players, consider modding in quick saves back at the very least to avoid frustration in case of crashes and explosions.
Ooh, now I